attention to this footage captured by a local farmer in the Vietnamese highlands. Watch carefully as two figures in military uniforms approach what looks like a massive aircraft fuselage sitting in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense jungle. See that dirt path leading up to it? Notice how the metal structure is weathered, rusted, bearing a faded airline logo on its tail. This isn't a crash site. This aircraft never fell from the sky. It was brought here piece by piece for a purpose so sinister that when investigators finally understood what they were looking at, it would expose one of the most disturbing serial killing operations in modern history. What you're seeing right now is the moment everything changed. This is the jungle laboratory where 25 people took their last breath. You know that feeling when you're at an airport, exhausted from a long flight, just trying to make your connection? You trust the system. You trust the people in uniforms. You never imagine that the cup of coffee someone hands you might be the last thing you ever drink. For 25 people from 12 different countries, that trust cost them everything. This is the story of Dr. Marcus Webb, a respected aviation medical consultant who worked at Brussels International Airport. To his colleagues, he was brilliant, dedicated, maybe a little obsessive about his research. To the families of his victims, he became something else entirely. A monster who turned one of humanity's greatest achievements, international air travel, into his personal hunting ground. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because nobody suspected a thing, not for years. And by the time anyone realized what was happening, Webb had perfected his system so well that people were vanishing without a trace, and the world kept spinning like nothing was wrong. It started with Emma Rodriguez. Well, it didn't start with her, but hers was the case that finally made people pay attention. Emma was 28, a freelance photographer from Barcelona traveling to Bali for a wedding shoot in October 2016. She had a layover in Brussels. 6 hours, long enough to be annoying, but not long enough to leave the airport. Her last Instagram post showed her at a coffee shop in Terminal B, smiling, exhausted, caption reading, "Halfway there, send caffeine." She never made her connecting flight. The airline assumed she'd missed it. Her client in Bali assumed she'd canceled. Her family back in Spain assumed she was out of cell range on some remote Indonesian island. By the time anyone realized Emma Rodriguez had actually vanished, 2 weeks had passed. But here's what made it even more horrific. Emma wasn't the first. She wasn't even close. The disappearances had been happening since 2012, maybe earlier. Marcus Webb had figured out something that most people never think about. Airports are perfect hunting grounds. Think about it. Hundreds of thousands of people passing through every single day, most of them alone, many of them traveling to distant countries where nobody would immediately notice if they went missing. Mix in language barriers, time zone confusion, assumption of missed connections, and you've got the perfect storm. Webb was 43 when he started his operation. He'd been working in aviation medicine for 15 years, starting as a flight surgeon before transitioning to airport health services. He had all the right credentials, all the right clearances, and most importantly, he had unfettered access to restricted areas that most airport employees never saw. His official job was managing the medical response team for passenger emergencies and consulting on health protocols for international travelers. What that really meant was that Webb could move freely through secure zones, had access to medical supplies and equipment, and could interact with passengers without raising suspicion. In fact, people were relieved to see him. A doctor in an airport? That's reassuring, right? Wrong. Webb had developed a system so calculated, so methodical, that he managed to abduct 25 people over 6 years without anyone connecting the dots. He targeted solo travelers during long layovers, people who were tired, disoriented, vulnerable. He'd approach them in terminal cafes or rest areas, always professional, always concerned. Sometimes he'd claim there was a health screening required for their destination country. Other times, he'd offer assistance with medication or suggest they visit the airport medical clinic for a quick check due to recent outbreaks. Once he had them isolated in restricted medical areas, he'd administer a powerful sedative cocktail disguised as routine shots or medication. Within minutes, his victims would lose consciousness. and then Marcus Webb would make them disappear. He had help. That's the part that still makes investigators sick to their stomachs. Webb wasn't working alone. He'd recruited 2 accomplices, Airport Security Supervisor Victor Rousseau and Cargo Logistics Coordinator Deng Thao. Together, they'd worked out every detail. Rousseau controlled the security camera feeds, creating blind spots and deleting footage. Thao arranged for special cargo containers, ones marked as medical waste or biological samples that required special handling and weren't subject to normal inspection protocols. Webb would drug his victims, Rousseau would ensure no cameras caught the transfer, and Thao would load unconscious people into containers that were then shipped on cargo flights to Southeast Asia, to Vietnam specifically, to a remote region in the Central Highlands where Webb had purchased land under a false identity back in 2010. Let me paint you a picture of what was waiting there. Webb had bought a decommissioned commercial aircraft fuselage from a Thai salvage company in 2011. He'd had it transported in sections to his property, a 40-acre plot surrounded by dense jungle, accessible only by a barely maintained dirt road that locals avoided. Over the course of a year, he'd reassembled the fuselage and converted the interior into what investigators would later describe as a fully functional surgical laboratory and prison. The plane sat there in the jungle, this massive metal structure that shouldn't exist, surrounded by trees and mud and silence. Inside, Webb had installed medical equipment, restraining systems, monitoring devices, and living quarters for himself. He'd set up generators for power, water filtration systems, everything he needed to keep his operation running. And what was his operation? What was worth all this planning, all this risk, all these lives? Webb claimed he was conducting medical research, experiments on pain tolerance, drug responses, sensory deprivation, psychological breaking points. He kept detailed journals, thousands of pages of notes documenting his findings. He believed he was advancing medical science, that the suffering he inflicted had value, that history would vindicate him. The reality was simpler and sicker. Marcus Webb was a sadist who'd found a way to indulge his darkest impulses while convincing himself it had purpose. His victims were kept in the modified aircraft cabin, restrained in seats that he'd welded to the floor. He'd run his experiments, take his notes, and when he was done with them, or when they couldn't survive anymore, he'd dispose of their bodies in the jungle. Some were buried in mass graves. Others were dissolved using industrial chemicals that Thao had been shipping to Vietnam, along with the human cargo, all disguised as medical supplies or agricultural products. Emma Rodriguez spent 11 days in that aircraft. 11 days of torture that I won't describe in detail because some things are too horrific to spell out. Webb's journals documented every moment, clinical and detached, like she was a lab rat instead of a woman with a family and a future. On her 12th day there, Emma Rodriguez died. Cause of death was listed in Webb's notes as cardiac arrest following extreme physiological stress. He buried her 70 meters from the fuselage in a grave with 4 other victims. Now here's the thing about missing persons cases in international travel. They're incredibly complicated. Jurisdiction issues, language barriers, assumption that people just change their plans. It all creates this fog where cases slip through cracks, but some families don't give up. Emma Rodriguez's mother, Carmen, was one of those people. When Emma didn't show up in Bali and didn't answer her phone, Carmen knew something was wrong. Emma was reliable. She always checked in. Always. Carmen filed a missing persons report in Barcelona. She contacted the Spanish embassy in Indonesia. She called the airline, the airport in Brussels, the airport in Bali. Everyone gave her the runaround. She probably missed her flight. Maybe she went somewhere else. Give it a few more days. Carmen didn't give it a few more days. She flew to Brussels herself. She spent 3 weeks there, sleeping in airport hotels, interviewing anyone who might have seen Emma. She posted flyers, she contacted local media, she made herself impossible to ignore. And slowly, very slowly, she started noticing something strange. Other families had been looking for people too. Other travelers who'd passed through Brussels and vanished. Not many. The cases were spread out over years, different nationalities, different circumstances. but they were there if you looked. Carmen connected with 5 other families. Together, they created a database of missing travelers. They found 18 cases spanning from 2012 to 2016, all with similar patterns. Solo travelers, long layovers, last known location somewhere in Brussels airport, failed to make connecting flights. 18 cases, and those were just the ones they could find through online searches and social media. How many more hadn't been reported or hadn't been noticed? They took their findings to Belgian federal police in January 2017. The lead investigator was a detective named Luc Mercier, a 20-year veteran who'd worked trafficking cases. At first, even he was skeptical. International travelers going missing at an airport? It could be anything. Voluntary disappearances, human trafficking through other channels, completely unrelated cases that just happened to share a location. But Mercier agreed to look into it. And when he started pulling passenger manifests, reviewing airport security protocols, and interviewing airport staff, he started seeing the pattern too. Every missing person had gone through a specific terminal during a specific time window. Every single one had been traveling alone. And in several cases, the last charge on their credit card was from the same airport cafe where Emma had posted her final Instagram photo. Mercier expanded his investigation. He brought in Interpol, contacted aviation security agencies, requested footage from airport cameras. Most of the footage from the earlier disappearances had been automatically deleted. Airports only keep recordings for 90 days, unless there's a specific reason to preserve them. But he managed to retrieve some material from more recent cases. And that's when he found Marcus Webb. In security footage from August 2016, Mercier spotted a pattern. A man in medical staff uniform approached a solo traveler, 32-year-old James Patterson from Melbourne, Australia, at a rest area. Brief conversation. The traveler follows the medical staff member toward a restricted access door. They both disappear from camera view. James Patterson never made his flight to Prague. His family reported him missing 3 weeks later when he failed to return home from his European vacation. Mercier tracked down the medical staff member's identity through employee records. Dr. Marcus Webb, aviation health consultant, employed at Brussels International since 2008. Impeccable record. Multiple commendations, not a single complaint. Mercier interviewed Webb in March 2017. Standard questions, nothing confrontational yet. Webb was calm, professional, said he didn't remember the specific interaction, but that he regularly assisted passengers with health concerns and he had explanations for everything. His story was airtight, but Mercier's instincts were screaming. Something was off about Webb. The way he was too calm, too prepared with answers. The way he maintained eye contact just a little too steadily. The way his story was perfect. Mercier started digging into Webb's background, his finances, his travel history, his properties. That's when he found the land purchase in Vietnam, a 40-acre property registered under the name Martin Weber, close enough to Marcus Webb to be suspicious, different enough to avoid casual detection. Vietnamese authorities were contacted through Interpol channels. They agreed to check out the property, but it took weeks to arrange. The location was remote, required coordination with local police who were undermanned and underfunded. By the time Vietnamese officers reached the property in May 2017, Webb had been tipped off. Not officially, nobody in the investigation leaked anything. But Webb was smart. He'd been monitoring news coverage, watching for any signs that families were connecting cases. When he saw Mercier's name mentioned in a Belgian newspaper article about missing travelers, he knew time was running out. Webb made his final trip to Vietnam in late April 2017. He took 3 people with him, his last victims. 2 women and 1 man, all abducted within a 5-day period, all drugged and shipped via Thau's cargo routes. Their names were Sophie Laurent from Lyon, Rachel Kim from Toronto, and Andreas Müller from Hamburg. They ranged in age from 26 to 38. They were travelers, adventurers, people with families who loved them and futures they'd never see. When Vietnamese authorities arrived at Webb's property on May 18, 2017, they found the aircraft fuselage exactly where that farmer's footage captured it. They found the graves, They found the chemical containers. They found Webb's journals, thousands of pages of meticulous notes detailing every experiment, every victim, every moment of suffering. And they found Sophie Laurent, still alive. Barely. She was the only survivor Webb ever had. She'd been there for 8 days, subjected to horrors she still can't talk about. Rachel Kim and Andreas Muller had died days before the rescue. Sophie's testimony would later become crucial evidence, but in that moment, she could barely speak. The psychological trauma was so severe that it took months of therapy before she could even begin processing what had happened to her. The rescue of Sophie Laurent triggered an international manhunt. Webb had fled Vietnam 2 days before authorities arrived. He'd been monitoring police radio frequencies and heard chatter about foreign law enforcement coordinating a site visit. He knew it was over. But where could someone like Marcus Webb hide? He'd built his entire life around his professional identity, his credentials, his access. He couldn't exactly blend into a crowd. Or could he? Interpol issued a red notice. Webb's photo was distributed to airports and border crossings across Asia. But here's what haunted everyone. Webb knew airports better than almost anyone alive. He'd spent 15 years learning their vulnerabilities, their blind spots, their security gaps. If anyone could slip through international borders undetected, it was him. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Remember Victor Rousseau, Webb's accomplice who controlled the security cameras? Rousseau's wife, Isabelle, had no idea what her husband had been involved in. When Belgian police arrested Rousseau in June 2017, Isabelle's world collapsed. Her husband, the man she'd been married to for 12 years, had helped kidnap and murder dozens of people. Rousseau initially refused to cooperate. He'd been loyal to Webb, whether out of fear or shared pathology, investigators never fully determined. But facing 25 counts of accessory to murder tends to adjust priorities. After 3 days of interrogation, Rousseau broke. He told investigators everything: the system they'd developed, how they'd selected victims, how they'd moved them through the airport. He provided details about the shipping routes Thao had arranged, the fake manifests, the bribed cargo inspectors, and crucially, he told them about Webb's escape plan. Webb had always known he might need to disappear someday. He'd created multiple false identities, established bank accounts in different countries, and maintained a safe house in Myanmar near the border with Thailand. Rousseau had helped him set it up back in 2015 during a supposed vacation to Southeast Asia. Myanmar wasn't a random choice. It had complicated extradition laws, underfunded law enforcement in rural areas, and a thriving black market for false documents. Webb figured he could hide there for years, maybe permanently. He was wrong. Belgian authorities coordinated with Myanmar's national police, and a joint task force was assembled. The safe house was located in a small town called Loi Khao, about 60 kilometers from the Thai border. Surveillance was established. Webb was there, living under the identity Michael Walsh, working as a volunteer at a rural medical clinic. The audacity of it, continuing to practice medicine while being hunted for serial murder, tells you everything about Webb's psychology. He genuinely believed his work had value, that he was helping people. The cognitive dissonance required to torture 25 people to death while also treating children's fevers at a clinic is almost incomprehensible. The arrest happened on July 3, 2017. Myanmar police, with Belgian and Interpol observers, raided the safe house at dawn. Webb didn't resist. He actually seemed relieved. One of the arresting officers later said Webb's first words were, "Did you find my journals? The data is irreplaceable." Not "I'm sorry," not "what have I done," just concern about his research data. Webb was extradited to Belgium, where he faced trial beginning in February 2018. The proceedings lasted 4 months and became a media sensation. Families of victims traveled from 12 different countries to attend. Sophie Laurent, the sole survivor, testified for 6 hours across 2 days. Her testimony was so harrowing that 3 jurors had to be replaced due to emotional distress. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: Webb's journals, which documented every victim in clinical detail, forensic evidence from the Vietnam site matching DNA of missing persons, financial records showing payments to Rousseau and Thao. security footage that Rousseau had failed to delete showing victims being led to restricted areas, shipping manifests with irregularities that Thao had signed off on. And then there was the footage that Vietnamese farmer had captured, the same footage you saw at the beginning of this video. The farmer, Nguyen Van Hai, had been exploring a rarely used path in the highlands when he spotted the aircraft fuselage. He'd filmed it because it seemed impossible. Why would an airplane be sitting in the middle of the jungle? He'd posted the video to a local community Facebook group asking if anyone knew what it was. By the time Nguyen's video went viral locally, police were already investigating the site, but that footage became crucial evidence proving the site's existence and condition. During the trial, prosecutors played the video, showing the jury exactly what Webb had created, this massive, impossible structure hidden in remote jungle where he conducted his experiments. Webb's defense strategy was disturbing. His lawyers didn't deny the facts. They couldn't. Instead, they argued that Webb suffered from a severe psychiatric disorder that prevented him from understanding the criminality of his actions. Expert psychiatrists testified that Webb displayed characteristics of antisocial personality disorder and grandiose delusions about his medical contributions. The prosecution's psychiatrists countered that Webb was perfectly sane and had demonstrated clear intent through years of meticulous planning. You don't accidentally create a secret jungle laboratory and systematically abduct 25 people. That requires awareness, planning, and understanding of right and wrong, understanding that Webb consciously chose to ignore. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. 25 counts of first-degree murder, 25 counts of kidnapping, 25 counts of unlawful imprisonment and torture, multiple counts of conspiracy, abuse of authority, and desecration of human remains. Victor Rousseau received 28 years after pleading guilty and cooperating with prosecutors. Dong Thao received 22 years. Both men expressed remorse during their sentencing, though how genuine that remorse was remains debatable. Marcus Webb received 25 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. During sentencing, he showed no emotion. When given an opportunity to address the court, he declined. He was led away in shackles, and that was the last time most of the world saw his face. The aftermath of the ghost terminal case, as it became known, rippled through the international aviation community. How had this happened? How had one person with the right credentials and the right accomplices managed to turn one of Europe's busiest airports into a hunting ground? Brussels International underwent a complete security overhaul. New protocols were implemented for medical staff access to restricted areas. Passenger tracking systems were enhanced. Most significantly, an international database was created specifically to flag missing persons cases involving last known locations at airports. If something like this happens again, the pattern will be caught much faster. Carmen Rodriguez, Emma's mother, became an advocate for missing persons' families. She established a foundation that helps families navigate the complex bureaucracy of international missing persons cases and pushes for better coordination between countries. She testified before the European Parliament about gaps in aviation security. Sophie Laurent, the sole survivor, has never spoken publicly about her experience beyond her trial testimony. She returned to France, changed her name, and rebuilt her life away from media attention. Her courage in testifying helped ensure Webb's conviction, and that's all she's ever said she wanted, to make sure he could never hurt anyone else. The families of the 25 victims created a memorial in Brussels. It's a simple stone marker in a park near the airport, engraved with names from 12 different countries. People still leave flowers there, and families visit when they can. It's become a place of remembrance for travelers who never made it home. Marcus Webb remains imprisoned in Belgium's high-security Lanton prison. He's 64 now, serving multiple life sentences that ensure he'll die behind bars. He's never expressed remorse, never apologized, never acknowledged the humanity of his victims. But the Vietnamese jungle where he committed his crimes, that's been reclaimed. The aircraft fuselage was removed, dismantled, and destroyed. The graves were excavated, and remains were returned to families around the world for proper burial. Nature is slowly taking back that 40-acre plot, covering the scars left by one man's incomprehensible cruelty. Dr. Marcus Webb was convicted of 25 counts of first-degree murder, 25 counts of kidnapping, 25 counts of unlawful imprisonment, 25 counts of torture, conspiracy to commit murder, abuse of professional authority, international human trafficking, and multiple counts of desecration of human remains. He received 25 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His accomplices, Victor Rousseau and Dong Tao, received sentences of 28 and 22 years respectively after pleading guilty to conspiracy, accessory to murder, and obstruction of justice. This case reminds us that evil doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it wears a white coat and a friendly smile. Sometimes it has credentials and authority. And sometimes the people we trust to keep us safe are the ones we should have been running from all along. To Emma Rodriguez, Sophie Laurent, James Patterson, Rachel Kim, Andreas Mueller, and the 20 other victims whose lives were stolen in the pursuit of one man's twisted version of science, you deserved better, your families deserved better, and we'll make sure your stories are never forgotten.